Welcome to Issues That Matter. My guest today is Robert Meeropol, and we're going to discuss the fact that uh, Biden did not exonerate. Is that the right word? Exonerate.
Sure.
Exonerate your mother, Ethel Rosenberg. So, Robert, tell us what transpired.
Okay, yeah, just for your listeners, I want to, my name's Robert Meeropol because I was adopted by Abel and Ann Meeropol after my parents, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg's execution in 1953 when I was only 6 years old. And my brother and I have been engaged really for 50 years in an effort to get out all the facts in my parents' case. Initially, it was an effort to clear both of their names. However, in the process of doing that, we used the Freedom of Information Act to force hundreds of thousands of previously secret government files in my parents' case. And some of those files, along with other material that came out in the meantime, showed that Julius Rosenberg, while he was ignorant of the atomic bomb project and was not the major atomic spy the government used, claimed that used to justify executing him, he did engage in military industrial espionage primarily during World War II to help the United States and Russia, the Soviet Union, defeat the Nazis. Uh, but the same material demonstrated more and more evidence came out indicating that Ethel was not actively involved. Now, uh, the the way this evolved is, or the way the thing that really nailed down my mother, the fact that my mother was never a spy and was executed as a master atomic spy anyway, was the release of a memo that happened in August of last year. Um, and but and I can describe that memo and will ultimately, but I think that given that this was the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle that my brother and I have been putting together for the last 50 years, I think it makes more sense for me to jump back to the 1970s when we filed our first Freedom of Information Act suit. And when we did that, material started to come out. There were what I will call, there were files from the FBI, files from the Justice Department. I will call them files from uh, prosecutorial agencies of the executive branch of our federal government. And those files said things like, well, the evidence against Ethel Rosenberg is weak, but we should arrest her anyway and give her a stiff prison sentence so she can be used as a lever against uh, her husband, Julius. So essentially, they were saying they could use her to manipulate my father into confessing to what they wanted her to confess to, but that the evidence against her was weak. Okay, that's before, that's it. Those are files from 1950. This is before she's even arrested. Then she's arrested, and uh, at the grand jury, uh, that's investigating this crime, the chief prosecution witnesses, who are David and Ruth Greenglass, David testifies that he never even talked to my mother about this, that he was involved with Julius, but not with Ethel. And Ruth testified that she didn't receive any information from the Rosenbergs in the fall of 1945, which is when.
Now, right, stop right there. I think people have to know that the green glasses was he David is his name?
Yes, David was
David?
my mother's younger brother.
Right, right.
And they were offered a deal for their testimony. And that in order to save themselves, this is what they said. And so they testified before the grand jury, essentially that Ethel wasn't involved. Then, a few weeks before the trial, which occurred 9 months later, in March of 1951, they give new statements to the FBI saying, and this is after a government file saying we need more evidence against Ethel. They then give new statements saying that Ethel was present at the meetings that Julius and Ethel had with the green glasses on September 25th, 1945, and that she typed up handwritten notes that David Gringlass made of his espionage sketch that he drew of the supposed cross-section of the atomic bomb. So they made new evidence emerged, and then at trial, they testified under oath to that new evidence, even though they testified under oath before the grand jury to the exact opposite. The jury was never told this, never knew this. In the meantime, in the mid-1990s, stuff called the Venona transcriptions are released. They are transcriptions that the United States Intelligence Services, the NSA, intercepted from the KGB. In these transmissions, that's where they get material that shows that Julius Rosenberg was involved in military-industrial espionage, but it's also in that same material we discover that the KGB gave all its agents code names. My father's code name was first Antenna and then Liberal. I think he actually had a third code name at one point. But they gave all their agents code names, including David and Ruth Gringlass, who were involved, but they didn't give one to Ethel, indicating they didn't consider her their agent. So we had internal government memos that show that the case against my mother was weak. We know that the evidence against her was fabricated just before the trial by the chief prosecution witnesses in order to save themselves. And then we know that the KGB gave all its agents code names and didn't give my mother one. Well, that's setting the stage for what happened in last summer, when a memo was released by the National Security Agency in response to our constantly pounding on their door using the Freedom of Information Act and saying, this material is 74 years old, there's no reason to keep it secret. And in that memo, the chief decryptor, the chief person who broke the Russian code, the hero of all the spy catchers, whose name was Meredith Gardner, he wrote a memo definitively stating that Ethel Rosenberg was not a spy. And this material was released. We put it all together and said, well, isn't it amazing? Both the KGB and the NSA agreed at the height of the Cold War. They didn't agree on anything else, but they both agreed that Ethel Rosenberg was not a spy. And yet she ends up executed as a master atomic spy, leaving my brother and I as orphans. So, given that Biden likes to talk about how moral he is and about how he's against the death penalty, and he wanted to do something about the federal death penalty before he left office, we thought this was an ideal vehicle for him to demonstrate the abuse of the federal death penalty, declare my mother's conviction and sentence wrongful, and exonerate her. That's the process. Well, we presented our materials. We used our local Congressman, Jim McGovern, who's been terrific. And he represents Western and Central Massachusetts, where I live. And we got a fair amount of publicity, particularly after Biden pardoned his son. And that became like big news. And he took certain amounts of actions, and I'm glad that he released Leonard Peltier to be with his family before he dies, but he did nothing without explanation about Ethel. And uh, that's the story. Now, to try to figure that I think gives the people who view this, hear this, what the basis for what was going on.
So you've been working on this for 50 years, right? And, you know, did you hold out any hope that Biden would exonerate your mother?
Well, if people asked me privately, uh, a year ago, as we really began to get, particularly in September, August and September, after this memo came out, and we decided full speed ahead, we only have a few months. People asked me, I would have said, well, we have two chances, slim and none. Uh, um, but the reality is hope springs eternal. And we got a lot of publicity this time, and we knew that the pardon office was looking at our material. And so we thought, well, just maybe. I would be lying to you if I didn't say I was disappointed when I found out that he did nothing, but I wasn't really surprised. I thought that, part of it is that even though we had this massive evidence, and even though this evidence was the government's own material, I mean, that's the amazing thing that I didn't mention before, is this evidence indicated that not only did they execute my mother wrongfully, they knew she was not a spy when they executed her. Uh,
Boy.
and so that, uh, she was essentially, from their point of view, well, collateral damage. That's the way it goes. And that, to be able to, to admit to that, for an American president to admit to that, when the United States government has never admitted that it wrongfully executed anyone, was just a bridge too far for Biden. He was, we know that in general he's pretty timid, and this was an action that was pretty bold. So while we had some hope, uh, we didn't expect it. Now, that said, with the Trump administration and Roy Cohn, who was one of the principal architects of my mother's execution, he was the lawyer who was an assistant prosecutor in my mother's and father's case, and who later on went on to become Donald Trump's mentor, taught him how to act the way he does in many cases, especially about legal matters. We realized that, there's no chance on earth that anything's going to happen with Trump. That said, we're not giving up hope. We've been doing this for 50 years. Uh, we're going to continue to gather whatever information we can. And also, I want to say that I have a tremendous sense of satisfaction for being able to force that material into the public eye, that it's now part of the record that the NSA and the KGB concluded Ethel Rosenberg was not a spy. And so the few old code warriors who continue to insist, oh, no, 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 she was guilty, she deserved what she got. Well, they're not quite members of the Flat Earth Society yet, but they're getting there. And knowing this, and knowing it's on the historical record, and knowing even if we can't get an American president to do the right thing, that people will know this, and it will slowly seep into our culture that my mother was wrongfully executed. That feels like a tremendous step forward. And as I said, we're going to continue to agitate around it.
So your niece, Ivy,
Mhm.
did a movie about your parents.
Mhm.
And where do you go from here? Where does your family go from here?
Well, I think that, that's an interesting question, because I'm 77, my brother's 81. Our generation of the family doesn't have too much time left. Uh, we have thought about the fact that the Justice Department, we now have definitive evidence that the Justice Department knew that the NSA concluded that Ethel wasn't a spy. And, our congressman feels that this warrants a congressional investigation. But of course, as long as the Republicans control the House of Representatives, there will be no investigation. So it's possible that come November of 2026, when the next congressional election comes, if the Democrats retake the House, that we could actually be uh, going in front of the House of Representatives to do this, to have an investigation and continue to press for it. This is, that's, and we will continue to press in the court of public opinion, which ultimately is the most important one. But in terms of getting an official presidential apology for the wrong that was done against our family, uh, that certainly won't happen for another 4 years. And who knows if it'll happen then. So while we're not giving up, you know, we don't know where this is going to go. And I'm not going to hold my breath because I don't think anything's going to happen anytime soon.
You live in Massachusetts, but your brother lives in New York,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Now, who is his representative?
I'm not sure. He lives in the Hudson River Valley, uh, you know, in the lower Hudson River Valley. I'm not, I don't, it's a swing district and I'm not sure,
Okay.
you know,
So, has that representative um done anything to help you guys?
not that I'm aware of.
So the burden falls on your congressperson.
Well, on our congressperson and that's right. And the people who for instance, we did get some support from um Pramila Jayapal, who's the head of the Progressive Caucus. She's a congresswoman from, I think it's Washington State.
Okay.
And so I think among, the progressive caucus of the Democratic Party, we would have general support for this. But of course, they're a minority within a minority party. So it doesn't just fall to Jim McGovern, but uh, we don't have the mainstream of American elected officials behind us.
Okay. So but basically have you um lobbied other legislators besides yours?
Yeah, well, there has been some lobbying that we've done. But we we're really focused on this point at sort of spreading the word. I mean, and that's one of the things we really worked hard at. And because the facts are on our side now. So of course, the more we get them out, the better. That doesn't necessarily impact official representatives, but it impacts the public in general. And,
Mm.
I think the other thing that sort of stands in our way, Cynthia, is, these people at this point, given what's going on in Washington right now, have bigger fish to fry. I mean, they're watching the dismantling of the governmental apparatus
Mm.
before their very eyes, and these are people who are going to try to stop that. And as important as this is to my brother and me and my family, and I think that it's also important politically because once we've shown the abuse that the justice system can be put to if it's politicized. And that's exactly what is going to happen in Washington at this moment. So it does have current political value, but at the same time, it doesn't quite rise to the level, particularly for these people, to protecting, separation of powers, the basic right of Congress to authorize expenditures, the fact that this executive branch of government is supposed to spend the money that Congress has authorized, that it can't just decide unilaterally not to, uh, you know, or that it can't hand over the the keys to the U.S. Treasury to an unelected multi-billionaire Elon Musk. I mean, all of all of that is on the Congress people's plate. So you know, we realize that at this moment in time, there's really not a whole lot we can do because all this other stuff comes first. Uh, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to keep plugging away and looking to the future. Uh, but I do want to emphasize that one of the things that we were trying to say was this wasn't just a 75-year-old case. This was also about the politicization of our justice system of justice and the damage that can do, the damage it did during the Great Red Scare of the McCarthy period when my parents were executed in the early 1950s, and the damage that it may very well do going forward in the next few years as the same thing appears to be happening again, only perhaps worse. We don't know.
In all the times that we've been talking, the one thing that is predominantly on my mind is when they executed, when the government executed your parents, the government knew that they made orphans of two little boys. And how could that happen? Didn't they care? Didn't they worry about where you and your brother Michael would land and wind up and stuff?
No, I don't think they cared. I could say more, but I don't think they really cared. As far as they were concerned, executing my parents served their political purposes, and that was more important than their own humanity.
That's awful. That really to me is a terrible thing.
Mhm.
So, uh, I think I just asked you this, but where do you go from here? Does your niece Ivy and your brother's kids and your kids, are they stepping up to the plate and saying, "Well, we'll take over for you"?
Well, I I don't doubt that they will when the time is right. However, our kids are a lot like other kids dealing with aging parents. They don't necessarily want to think about their parents no longer being there. Uh, and so, anytime one of us makes a comment that, we only have a short time left and, you might have to take over, they say, we don't want to hear that. Not
Mhm.
that they won't do it, but they don't want to hear, they don't want to, I think a lot of people who still have parents who are alive, especially if those parents don't have terminal diagnoses and aren't on death's door, uh,
Mhm.
they don't they don't want to deal with the thought that their parents are mortal. They want them to live forever. I mean, that's so I can see that, I can understand their reluctance to address these issues, and to say things like, well, you're not that old, you still have a ways to go. We can talk about this in 5 more years. What was it? Yeah, Roz Chast, the famous cartoonist who wrote a whole book about this that was entitled, her discussions with her parents about their aging, in which the title of the book was, Can't we talk about something more pleasant? Uh, so
Mhm.
I do think, uh, we don't know what the future is going to hold. We don't know how much time we have. Uh, I certainly think that given the four grandchildren's involvement. They wrote a wonderful op-ed that was published, the four grandchildren in the Boston Globe, in at the very end of December or the beginning of January. I can't remember exactly the exact date, but their involvement is real. And as long as Michael and I are here, we're going to lead the charge, but I wouldn't be surprised if we hand the baton off to them at some point.
Wow. So keep me posted. And whenever you want to do a show about, the continuation of this saga, I would love to have you back on. Any final thoughts?
Uh, well, no, that's pretty much it. My final thought is that you probably won't hear much from me for a few months. We're going to take a break, and we're going to assess the situation. And when it gets towards June, which will now be uh, the 72nd anniversary of the execution,
Yeah.
you may be hearing more from us.
Okay, great. Okay, so you've been listening to Robert Meeropol. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Robert, we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia.